One of the hardest things that you'll have to do as a startup founder is absolutely nailing your product positioning. And that's because the landscape is rapidly changing with large existing players and new emerging competitors. And so how do you navigate this space and really get your product positioning just right to help you grow as quickly as possible? Hi, everyone. My name is Shuo Chen, and I am a former founder, now investing in founders and teaching founders at Berkeley and Stanford. And I'm also a board member here at DECODE, the largest founder community that's co-hosted across Berkeley and Stanford. And I want to welcome you back to our weekly tactical tips, where we talk about very specific action steps that you can take around one topic that would help you build faster, better as a founder. So without further ado, let's dive into the topic for today. One very quick announcement right before we get into the three detailed tactics for today is that the DECODE Annual Conference is back this November 15th. If you're interested in attending small and intimate roundtable discussions with some of the best speakers out there, including C-suite operators from OpenAI and Roblox, as well as investors at Lightspeed and IOVC, as well as founders who are building unicorns, please make sure to check out our annual conference that's hyperlinked down below. Otherwise, we want to get on with the three specific tactical tips that we have ready for you today to really talk about your product positioning. So getting into our tactic one for today, in order to really nail your product positioning, you want to start by doing more product marketing research. So this is research around the audience, around the market, as well as around the product. So specifically, how would you do more product marketing research to really help you nail your positioning? Well, when it comes to audience research, you want to first start by mapping your entire TAM, which is your total addressable market. Understand who are all the people that could benefit from using your product. And specifically, you want to understand the very specific demographics and even firmographics for each of the target companies that you're trying to sell into. So you're not just trying to understand the background of the target companies, you're also trying to understand the demographics of that specific point of contact that you're trying to reach. So that's around audience research. Two is you want to do research on the overall market. You want to analyze competitors, other complementary products to you, and just map the ecosystem out. Not everyone is a competitor out there, so make sure that you keep an eye out for complementary products as well. These might be partners that you work with on a go-to-market strategy. I know for a lot of founders, they tend to oftentimes overestimate who their founders might be and forget to see that there are actually a lot of complementary products they should be partnering with instead. And then the third thing you want to do research on is the actual product itself. So you want to make sure that there is alignment internally, whether it's across product or go-to-market or customer success or customer support, etc. You want to make sure that everybody within the company, within your startup, is aligned on the specific problem you're solving for your audience, the jobs to be done or the specific use cases, the personas that your product can serve, how your product is different from alternatives and others out there, and really the product roadmap and features. So you want to make sure that you do research on the audience, on the market, as well as on your specific product, and make sure that everybody in the company is aligned on all of these specific points. Because with these three things, then you can start to map out a curated output. You can create an output that would include mainly three things. One, a prioritized list of audience segments and a very clearly defined primary audience to focus your positioning on. So in order to really nail down your product positioning, don't be afraid to go really, really narrow. Two, you want to have a clear mapping of competitors. This would be on a 2x2 competitive matrix, and you can lay this out according to any particular of the two metrics that you consider to be most important. And then three, you want to have a very clear definition of the primary problem that your product solves today. So as soon as you have a prioritized list of narrowed customer segments, a clear mapping of competitors, and a clear definition of the primary problem you solve, then you can use this to build a more robust process for nailing down your product positioning. And of course, research is an ongoing process. Don't think of it as a one and done, like you do this once and you're done for good. You definitely have to refine continuously as you go. So now that you've done some basic product marketing research across your audience, your market, and your product, and you have this list of audience members, you have a clear mapping of your competitors and complementary product providers, and you have a good sense of the primary problem that your product solves today, then you want to get into tactic 2, which is identifying the product type and determining any sort of points of comparison. So this is where you're choosing from 4 main product types. So irregardless of the specific kind of product, you oftentimes fall into one of the 4 main product types. You're either 10 times better, you're a new way of doing something, you're a vertical solution, or you are a solution where you're getting your buyers to choose between buy versus build. So 10 times better, new way, vertical solution, or buy versus build. And you want to match your product positioning to the specific product type that you fit in. And you want to match the product type to the output based on all the product marketing research that we just did in tactic number 1. So it changes depending on your audience, the market, and your specific product. So based on the research that we just did in step 1, if you're looking at your audience, the market, and the product, you're saying, hey, given this, it's best that I position myself as a 10 times better solution. That's great. That means that you have a lot of existing competitors. You have to be able to be 10 times faster, better, cheaper than an existing provider. Or you're looking at your product research to say, hey, there's not a lot of competitors out there. In fact, my audience members don't see all the competition. Well, then you could perhaps brand yourself as a vertical solution in that specific space. But if you're looking at this to say, hey, there's actually a lot of competitors out there, and I don't know that I can be 10 times better, then maybe the story that you're telling is we're a new way of approaching things. So again, depending on the research of your audience, market, and product, you would define your product positioning into one of the 4 main product types. And of course, don't try to beat incumbents on everything. There's no way that you would be able to with substantially less resources, less time to build, less of a team. You want to focus on an audience or use case that you could truly outperform on. And if you're ever stuck between choosing any of these types, probably choose vertical solution over a new way. Generally speaking, a new way sounds like a great idea, like we're a new way of solving a problem, but generally your audience members will probably like vertical solution more than a new way. They want to see that you're deeply integrated into this one vertical and that you have a very narrow focus. Also, if you're stuck, generally choose 10 times better and buy versus build versus a new way. So you can see that basically out of the 4 categories, you would generally want to choose any of the categories over a new way because it's really easy for startups to say we're a new way of doing things when in reality, your customers are comparing you against all of the existing solutions that are out there. So it's very difficult to tell the story of a new way. And generally speaking, all of the other 3 types lead to actually more effective and clear product positioning. So you want to choose 10 times better because you can prove this with data. You want to choose buy versus build because you can clearly indicate that it's cheaper to buy than it is for your customers to build in-house. So those are all some of the specific priorities. So that's why if you are really stuck between choosing which of the 4 product types your product positioning message should fall into, generally choose the other 3 over a new way. And if you realize that, hey, none of these types just fit, well, you have one of 2 issues. Either you have the issue of you just have a lack of clarity around the specific product that you have, and or 2, that you are lacking in terms of go-to-market differentiation. Or the last potential issue that might pop up is that your audience is too broad. It's so broad that it's hard for you to define one of the 4 product types for you. And of course, once you've chosen one of these 4 main product types that your product falls into for positioning, 10 times better, new way, vertical solution, or buy versus build, then you want to make sure that you're anchoring yourself to the right comparator. So are you comparing your product and anchoring that to a customer who would otherwise build internally? Are they stitching together tools that exist in a specific vertical? Are they choosing between using an incumbent, or are they just building a horizontal generic solution? So you want to figure out what your competitor is. If the comparator is building internally, then you want to tell the story of the buy versus build. If you're comparing yourself to stitching together tools, then perhaps this is something where you're a deeply integrated vertical solution where your existing customers don't need to stitch together tools anymore. If your comparator is using an incumbent, then maybe this is where you tell 10 times better, where you're 10 times faster, better, cheaper. Or if you're comparing against a horizontal generic solution, then a number of the product positioning messages messages that we mentioned above would work because you're either better or you're just more vertically integrated. So you want to make sure to anchor against that. If you want to understand how this fits in just in a nice graphical form, make sure to check out the weekly newsletter that we have hyperlinked below, where we'll link to the original chart that allow you to see and self-diagnose which product positioning that you best fit into. And that brings us into tactic number 3, which is all about writing clear positioning that shapes your product story. So once you've done enough research, you've figured out what product type you're falling into and who you're comparing yourself against, then you want to make sure that you're writing very clear product positioning. So you want to make it abundantly clear how you're different from the appropriate alternative, depending on the comparator you've selected. And then you want to answer key questions when you're actually writing out this product positioning message. It's mainly 3 questions that you have to answer. 1, who is the product for? 2, what exactly is your product? And 3, why is your product better? So what are the specific tips that I would share under writing out clear answers for each of these 3 questions? Well, under 1, who is a product for? You want to be as specific as possible, and you want to stack your ranking next for your potential ideal customer profile just to be as clear as possible. So this is where you definitely don't want to go too broad and end up saying nothing to no one. If you're everything for everyone, then you're nothing to no one. And this is probably the biggest mistake I see founders making, where they really want to be, hey, like, here's a chart, here's my product, here's all of my other competitors on a chart, and I check every single box, whereas all of my other competitors only check some of the boxes. This is actually one of the worst places to be, because it means that you have to outbuild every single competitor. So they've only chosen a select few features to prioritize, whereas you're trying to build the entire stack of features. That's generally not a good place to be. So you want to be very, very specific and say, well, I want to prioritize just these 3 features because they're the 3 most important. I actually don't even need to build out all of these other features that competitors have. And you also want to use language that your customers might use to describe themselves. So you don't want to use jargon like distributed knowledge workers, or, if workers are calling themselves fully remote or work from home employees. You want to make it as close to home as possible. This is where, again, you want to survey your potential customers, ask them how they would describe themselves, and they use that specific language. Don't use fancy words. Try to stick to words that your customers would actually use in conversation to describe themselves. So again, this is all answering just the who is a product for. Be as clear as possible, be as narrow as possible, and use the language that your own users will use to describe themselves. And then in answering the second question of what exactly is a product, well, your audience, they don't really know what your product is. So you just, again, want to use plain English and just keep it clear, not clever. So instead of saying things like AI-powered revenue design, just have a clear way of explaining exactly what are you doing. Maybe it's just an AI code editor for a specific accounting tool, instead of AI-powered revenue design that sounds really fancy, but your users don't really understand what it is. Or you want to make it even more simpler and say, this is just a tool to use to manage your business emails online. So depending on what specifically you do, just make it as easily understandable as possible. Avoid fancy words. So when you describe your product, make it so easy that you can ask 10 people who have never heard your product before, tell them in one sentence, and they know exactly what it is and don't have to ask any follow-up questions to clarify. And of course, 3, in writing very clear product positioning language, is clearly addressing why is your product better. You want to pick the reason why your product is better than majority of what your ideal customer profile, your target customers will compare you to. So this is your source of comparison, your source of competition, potentially, depending on your product type. So for example, if your alternative, the alternative to your product is to build internally, then you want to highlight in your product positioning language, save X number of months building this yourself. Buy our tool instead. Now, if the alternative is a mix of internal tools and expensive service providers, then maybe you can highlight, save X millions in annual legal fees. You generally don't want to call out specific competitors because then you're drawing attention to those specific competitor names. So you don't want to say things like, unlike competitors, we offer XYZ and ABC. You want to be very, very clear in quantifying exactly how you're better than the alternative out there. So if you're putting it all together to make it super easy and super clear for people to understand, you want to highlight who is a product for, what exactly is a product, and why is it better. So for example, it could be for lawyers, specifically helping them write business emails faster, saving you the 10 hours that you would have otherwise used to write emails yourself. That's just one example of what a tool could potentially look like. So at the end of this process, the goal is to really have such clear product positioning that people aren't going to confuse you. So to recap, we talked about 3 top specific tactics to nailing your product positioning, and that is starting with perfecting an ongoing process of product marketing research. So not perfecting the actual research itself, but perfecting the process of doing product market research. We are researching across the audience, the market, the product. The second tactical tip being that you want to identify your specific product type, which of the 4 do you fall in, and determining the point of comparison. And then step 3, making sure that you write out very clear product positioning that clearly articulates who you are to your customers across who is a product for, what exactly is a product, and why is it better than alternatives. You could even make it really, really easy by drawing an analogy. So a lot of startups like to use Uber for cleaners, right? So you could say, well, Uber for cleaners. That makes it very clear what the product is, who might use the product. It's just daily consumers who might be looking for cleaners. And of course, you want to articulate why it's better. So Uber for cleaners, but 10 times cheaper. That's just one example of a very clear and concise product positioning. Of course, ultimately, this all depends on your specific product. So if you want to learn more about other traps to avoid in this process or tools that you can leverage, please feel free to check out our full newsletter hyperlink down below to learn more. Otherwise, we would love to see you at our upcoming annual conference that's coming up on November 15th. Please make sure to check out the RSVP information down below. And if you have any further comments and or questions based on today's session, as always, please don't forget to leave a comment for us down below or reach out to us directly on email or on LinkedIn, and we would love to address your question in a future video. And of course, if you found today's video helpful, please don't forget to share with other friends of yours in the founder community, and of course, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thanks so much for tuning in, and we'll see you in a future week. Thanks and take care.